Welcome to the official podcast of Vienna Shadows, a secret society uncovering Vienna's hidden mysteries. Lean back and enjoy the show.
Imagine surviving a political assassination on the floor of a parliament building, only to realize the massive marble columns guarding the room have started bleeding red dust.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is quite the image.
Right. I mean, today we're doing a deep dive into a campaign setting where the monsters don't just, lurk in abandoned dungeons.
Yeah.
They wear perfectly tailored suits, they pass legislation, and they fund their political ambitions by literally trading away the soul of their nation.
It's just an incredibly ambitious approach to tabletop role-playing. We're looking at the Austrian Parliament TTRPG adventure arc document today, which outlines this whole campaign setting called Vienna Shadows.
Yeah.
And what makes this material so fascinating to me is that it uses the very real, very tense history of 1920s Austria as the direct foundation for a supernatural horror game.
Exactly. So look, our mission today is to take you step by step through building this campaign for your own gaming table. We're going to start with the historical backgrounds, break down the mechanics, and then end with a complete, ready-to-play 3-act adventure story.
Which is perfect if you're a game master looking to run something really unforgettable. This is basically your toolkit.
It really is. So to set the stage, we have to look at the mood of 1920s Vienna. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, this massive, centuries-old superpower, has just collapsed after the First World War.
Leaving behind just a completely fractured society. I mean, the city of Vienna goes from being this glittering imperial capital of a vast empire to, well, a politically isolated metropolis in a tiny, struggling, brand new democratic republic.
The social fabric is just tearing apart. It feels like a historical pressure cooker.
Oh, absolutely.
You have the hyper-rationalism of this modern democracy being sourced of oil in the exact same pot as the terrifying ancient magic of the Alpine winters. It's just an incredible aesthetic.
It really is. But before a game master can just drop their players into this world, they really need to build the physical stage. The campaign revolves almost entirely around one specific location, which is the Austrian Parliament Building on the Ringstraße.
Right, the Ringstraße itself kind of establishes the thematic tension of the whole game. It's this grand boulevard that was constructed exactly where the old insular imperial defensive walls used to stand.
Yeah, Emperor Franz Joseph ordered those walls demolished in the mid-19th century to, create an open modern city center.
So the very ground the parliament is built on represents this transition from a fortified defensive empire to an exposed open society. And the source document notes that the architect who won the commission, Theophil von Hansen, he was obsessed with capturing that transition.
He really was. I mean, he was a Danish-born architect who spent 8 years in Athens studying the Acropolis.
Wow, 8 years.
Yeah. And he came to the conclusion that the architectural language of ancient Greece was literally the only suitable vessel for a modern democracy. So he essentially dropped a pristine Hellenic masterpiece right into the middle of Central Europe.
But the game material describes this architectural choice as a semiotic battlefield. I noticed that phrase, actually. Semiotic battlefield. We need to unpack that for the game masters listening. How does a building become a battlefield of symbols for the players?
Well, think about what happens when you force a visual representation of absolute logical Greek democratic perfection onto a population that is heavily divided, deeply traumatized by war, and
accustomed to centuries of Catholic imperial rule, right?
Exactly. The architecture doesn't just sit there looking pretty, it actively dictates behavior and creates conflict.
Yeah.
The symbols of the building completely clash with the reality of the people inside it.
It's like trying to run a brand new cutting-edge operating system on a water-damaged medieval abacus.
That is a great way to put it.
You have this beautiful logical framework of the Greek temple, but the hardware it's running on, this fractured post-imperial society is just completely incompatible. It's like wearing a tuxedo to a street brawl.
Yes. Beautiful, but completely the wrong outfit for the violent reality of the 1920s. And that structural fiction is literally everywhere in the building.
Right.
Hansen didn't just design the exterior. He designed the furniture, the chandeliers, and he incorporated very specific materials. He used red marble columns from Salzburg to represent the blood of the nation.
Which brings us to the centerpiece, the massive statue of Pallas Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom, standing right out in front of the building.
Sculpted by Carl Kuhnmann, yeah. She was intended to represent a neutral, supranational ideal a unifying figure of wisdom for a multi-ethnic state.
But the way she's positioned is just brilliant environmental storytelling. Athena has her back turned to the actual Parliament building.
It's so good.
She is facing away from the politicians and looking out at the city. The source material mentions this birthed a famous Viennese joke that wisdom is found in the streets, not the legislature.
Which is pretty funny. But the irony deepens when you look at the base of that fountain. Beneath Athena are 4 reclining figures representing the great rivers of the empire. So you have the Danube, the Inn, the Elbe, and the Moldau.
And by the 1920s, the borders have been completely redrawn. The Elbe and the Moldau rivers now flow through the newly independent nation of Czechoslovakia.
Right, meaning the fountain is a monument to an empire that literally no longer exists. The water flows over geographic lies, basically.
It's a constant visual reminder of loss.
Exactly.
So if the physical stage is this fractured and full of irony, it makes total sense that the society operating inside it would be just as broken. Which brings us to the factions your players will be dealing with.
Right, what the setting calls the War of the Robes.
Yeah. And just as a quick note for the listeners, the source material is very careful to represent these 3 competing power structures objectively, right? Treating them as complex ecosystems rather than simple good or evil alignments.
Yes, absolutely. So first we have the clerical robe.
Led by Monsignor Ignaz Seipel, who is a fascinating historical figure. He was a Catholic priest and a brilliant academic who actually served as Chancellor of Austria.
Right. His faction represents traditional authority, the Catholic Church, and the old social order. They derive their legitimacy from, divine right and historical continuity.
Which is powerful.
Very. And they are credited with stabilizing the devastating hyperinflation crisis of the early 1920s. But that economic stability comes at the cost of demanding rigid social repression. Plus, they are deeply skeptical of the democratic process itself.
Okay, so then you have the academic robe. These are the conservative jurists, the professors, the university elite. They view themselves as the absolute guardians of the law and classical tradition, right?
Correct. And in the game's faction ecosystem, they generally align with the clerical faction to maintain order against what they see as the chaos of the working class.
Which brings us to the third faction, the worker suit. These are the social democrats who fundamentally controlled the city government of Vienna, a period historically known as Red Vienna.
And they were attempting to engineer a completely new socialist society from the ground up.
Right, by building massive municipal housing blocks, the Gemeindebauten. These weren't just simple apartment complexes. They were heavily fortified superblocks. They had their own clinics, libraries, and running water, which was a massive luxury for the working class at the time.
But the underlying mechanism of the conflict here is how those superblocks were funded. The Social Democrats paid for this massive social experiment by aggressively levying taxes on luxury goods.
Like high-end restaurants, horse racing, domestic servants.
Exactly.
So the working class is finally getting running water, but the old elite, the clerical and academic robes, are footing the bill through these heavy taxes.
Which explains the political electricity. It's an unsustainable economic and social standoff. Add in the fact that the Social Democrats have their own paramilitaries of the Schutzbund swearing off against right-wing militias like the Heimwehr, and you literally have a recipe for violence.
Okay, so how do players actually fit into this rigid society? Like, do they have to pick a side?
Well, they don't necessarily have to swear loyalty to any of these factions, but they are physically subject to what the game calls the robe bonus.
I love this mechanic. I really want to highlight this for the listeners.
It's so elegant. The literal attire your character wears, whether it's the traditional clerical robe, an academic coat, or a worker suit, directly dictates the situational bonuses you get when interacting with the architectural symbols of the building.
So your clothing dictates your social standing, and your social standing dictates your survival.
Exactly. Because the War of the Robes wasn't just metaphorical debates. The Austrian House of Representatives in this era was notorious for physical violence. I mean, deputies were known to engage in filibusters that escalated into massive brawls.
Right, where actual glass inkwells were hurled across the room.
Yes. So the game treats a heated parliamentary session as a tactical combat encounter. You are rolling dice to dodge flying inkwells and screaming politicians.
That is wild. But as chaotic as the daytime politics are, the setting of Vienna Shadows completely shifts genres when the sun goes down, right?
Oh, completely. The daytime is defined by political realism. The nighttime is defined by the dark folklore that invades the city during the Alpine winter.
And that transition begins right back on the architectural ramps of the Parliament. Those ramps are guarded by 8 massive marble statues of ancient historians.
Right. You have Greek historians like Herodotus and Thucydides on one side, and Roman historians like Caesar and Tacitus on the other. Architecturally, Hansen placed them there to remind the politicians walking into the building that history is the ultimate auditor of their actions.
But in the lore of the game, these statues are not just decorative marble. They are the keepers of moral weight.
Yes, and if a player character figures out how to interact with them, these historians provide specific, powerful boons. Like Thucydides wrote heavily about the brutal realities of war, so connecting with his statue grants the player a bonus to tactical awareness in urban combat.
Oh, nice. And Herodotus grants insight into local folklore and forbidden rites.
Right, and the players will absolutely need those boons because the primary timeline of this adventure arc takes place between December 25th and January 6th, which is a period known in Alpine folklore as the Rauhnächte.
The Smoke Nights, a time when the veil between worlds thins out completely and the laws of nature are just suspended.
Exactly. The cold winter skies of Vienna become the hunting ground for the wild jag, the wild hunt.
And the campaign setting takes this classic rural folklore and brilliantly twists it into urban horror. Instead of fairy tale hunters in the forest, the wild hunt here is made up of the spectral souls of those who died during World War I, alongside, forgotten imperial royalty.
Violently trying to reclaim the city they lost.
Right. And the only architectural defense the players have against them are the bronze horse tamers statues at the foot of the Parliament ramps, which can be used to bind the spectral steeds.
Which is such a cool use of the actual physical space.
Yeah.
But while the Wild Hunt focuses on the city at large, down in the narrow shadow alleys of those new municipal superblocks, a much more targeted predator is stalking the population, the Yule Cat.
Okay, wait. I have to stop here and challenge the source material on this.
Hey.
Yeah, the Yule Cat, or Jólakötturinn, is a very specific piece of Icelandic mythology. It's the giant cat that eats you if you don't receive new clothes for Christmas. What is an Icelandic myth doing in a game set in 1920s Austria? It feels completely out of place.
I thought the exact same thing at first. It seems totally disconnected until you look at how the game designers translated the core mechanism of that myth into the historical reality of the 1920s. Think about what the Icelandic Yule Cat represents.
It punishes those who cannot afford new garments.
Right. Now, apply that to a society that just survived the complete destruction of its currency, the hyperinflation crisis.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, the designers adapted the monster into a horrific manifestation of urban poverty. In Vienna Shadows, the Yule Cat targets the middle class who lost their life savings to hyperinflation, or the working class who simply can't afford new clothes despite the new housing projects.
So it stalks anyone whose robes are tattered or whose suits are worn thin. That completely flicks my understanding of it.
Right.
It takes a quirky myth and turns it into a relentless, supernatural enforcer of class-based survival. It's like a supernatural audit with claws. It ties the very real economic horror of the First Republic directly to a monster you have to fight with dice in an alleyway.
It's terrifying. It creates a situation where poverty itself attracts supernatural danger. And if a player finds themselves staring down this creature in a dark alley, well, they have to rely on the game's core mechanical engine to survive.
So let's break down that engine. How do the players actually interact with this world mechanically? The source outlines a very streamlined 1d6 roll-under system, right?
Yeah. Every player character has a set of attributes rated from 1 to 5. Whenever they attempt a difficult task like dodging an inkwell or running from the Yule Cat, they roll a single 6-sided die. To succeed, the number on the die must be equal to or lower than their attribute score.
It's elegant and simple.
Yeah.
But there is a massive catch that drives the narrative tension. Rolling a 6 on the die is called a passion flare.
Yes. Even if your attribute is highly boosted and you technically succeed on the task, rolling a 6 means a complication is introduced to the scene. And the passion flare feeds directly into the most important tracking mechanic on the character sheet, the passion meter.
Right, because as your players witness the chaos of the city, the poverty, the street warfare between militias, the supernatural horrors of the Smoke Nights, their passion score slowly rises. It's basically a measure of their emotional destabilization.
Yeah. Exactly. And the mechanical tipping point occurs when a character's passion score exceeds their reason attribute. Once that happens, the player suffers severe penalties to any diplomacy or negotiation checks, but they receive significant bonuses to combat and violence.
Which is just brilliant.
Yep.
The mechanics physically force the player at the table to experience the exact same political electricity the city is suffering from.
Yeah, it really does.
You might go into a scene wanting to be a rational, calm diplomat. You want to use your reason. But the dice rolls and that rising passion meter inevitably push you toward throwing the inkwell.
Because the system refuses to let you remain a purely rational actor in an irrational world. It mirrors the tragedy of the era. You can try to hold on to your democratic ideals, but the environment will eventually break your composure.
Okay, so we have the historical world, the political factions, the dark folklore, and the dice mechanics. Now let's put it all together into the actual story arc the Game Master will run. The source document provides a complete 3-act story called The Silent Republic.
Yes. Let's walk through how this actually plays out at the table. Act I is called The Portico of Blood.
Ooh, ominous.
Very. The campaign drops the players right into the deep end of the political turmoil. It's late December, the start of the Smoke Nights. The players are in the middle of a heated parliament session, tasked with protecting Whistleblower, a former imperial archivist.
And this archivist delivers a massive piece of lore to the players. Remember Chancellor Seipel's 1922 League of Nations loan that supposedly saved the country from hyperinflation?
Right.
The archivist has physical proof that the loan was secured using mythic collateral. The politicians literally put up the souls of those 8 marble historian statues outside as collateral for the international money.
Which reveals that the state's moral integrity is quite literally financially bound to foreign supervisors. It's crazy. And as the players try to process the implications of this, the session erupts. An inkwell is thrown. A massive brawl breaks out on the floor.
But the brawl is just a ritualistic distraction. It's cover for an assassination attempt by the Heimwehr, the right-wing militia. The players have to extract the archivist, fighting their way through the Hall of Pillars.
And as they navigate this violence, the setting actively shifts from a political thriller into supernatural horror.
Yes. The physical architecture reacts to the spilling of blood. Those red marble columns of Salzburg, meant to represent the nation, begin to literally bleed red marble dust into the air.
Which catapults the players into Act 2, the night of the Wild Hunt. The archivist informs the players that a secret cabal of monarchists is using the chaos to actively summon the Wild Hunt, hoping the spectral WWI dead will purge the city of its socialist elements.
And to stop this, the players have to go down, deep underneath the Ringstraße, into the subterranean archives of the Parliament.
Right. The archives serve as a massive labyrinthian dungeon crawl. I mean, there are over 160 years of hidden political knowledge buried down there. The setting uses the fact that modern renovations have routinely uncovered hidden artifacts in these basements to justify this massive underground complex of secrets.
I love the severe genre shift here.
Yeah.
It is so brilliant. You start the evening dodging inkwells in a tense bureaucratic debate, and suddenly you are in a damp, floated dungeon directly underneath the city streets.
Exactly. They are searching for the Binds of Athena, which are ritualistic tools designed by the architect Hansen to keep the mythic forces in check. But the challenge is that the archives are flooded.
Right, because the physical geography of the empire changed. The river gods from the fountain, the Danube and the Inn, are enraged and have manifested as vengeful elementals lurking in the dark water.
And as if fighting water elementals in a flooded basement isn't stressful enough, the Yule Cat is down there too. It has been stalking the refugees who fled into the tunnels to escape the political violence above.
So you have to fight a supernatural poverty cat while trying not to drown in the basement of democracy.
Pretty much. And by the time the players survive this, their passion meters will likely be maxed out, making them incredibly volatile, just as they reach the climax of the campaign. Act 3. The Judgment of Athena.
The players have secured the binds from the flooded archives, but the clock has run out. It is January 5th, the final, most powerful smoke night.
The climax brings all the disparate elements of the setting into one massive convergence on the Ringstraße. The veil is completely gone. The Wild Hunt descends from the winter sky as a whirlwind of spectral hussars trying to violently reclaim the spiritual essence of the empire.
At the exact same time, the human factions reach their breaking point. A massive socialist demonstration turns into a literal siege. The right-wing Heimwehr and the socialist Schutzbund are engaged in open street warfare over the physical control of the government.
So the players are caught in the middle of a multi-directional war zone, and their objective is to physically scale the Palace Athena fountain in the midst of this chaos, and use the binds to stabilize the goddess, forcing her to enact her supranational authority.
If the players manage their dice pools, survive the crossfire, and succeed on their rolls, Athena's Medusa head shield flares with blinding light. The light petrifies the spectral hunters of the Wild Hunt, stops the street violence in its tracks, and forcefully restores the rational law of the Republic.
A decisive victory, but one that comes with a profound thematic cost.
Yeah, I read the ending notes in the source material, and it is an incredibly bittersweet ending for the players. Like, we saved the city, but we basically turned its soul to stone. The text explicitly states they do it at the cost of binding Vienna to a cold, heartless wisdom.
But it is the only ending that honors the historical reality of the era. The source document refers to this setting as a doomed timeline. Hanson's attempt to force a Hellenic democratic ideal onto a city rooted in imperial Catholicism created an architectural and social dissonance that just couldn't be permanently fixed.
It fueled radicalism. Every victory the players achieve in the 1920s, no matter how heroic, merely delays the inevitable dark slide into the autocracy of the 1930s. The democratic architecture ultimately fails to prevent the collapse of the First Republic.
And the players need to feel the weight of that impending history. It elevates the campaign from a simple monster hunting game into a profound exploration of collective memory, the burden of history, and the fragility of human institutions. You can win the battle, but you cannot stop the timeline.
So to summarize for the game masters listening, you now have an incredible toolkit. You have the rich, divided history and the physical architecture of the War of the Robes. You have the terrifying, culturally adapted folklore of the Ronekta and the Yule Cat.
You have the elegant 1d6 passion mechanic that forces your players to feel the stress of the era.
Exactly. And you have a complete 3-act story that takes them from the legislative floor to flooded archives, and finally to a desperate climb up a monument.
It is a campaign that demands players think critically. They aren't just figuring out how to defeat a monster, they are forced to confront the systemic failures of a society that creates those monsters in the first place.
Which leaves you with a final thought to mull over as you prep your own sessions. We've talked extensively about fighting the ghosts of the Wild Hunt and banishing the Yule Cat. But what if the real monsters in this setting aren't the supernatural creatures at all?
Right.
What about the politicians in Act Aska who knew those historian statues were bound entities all along? How do you role-play a monster that wears a perfectly tailored suit, operating entirely within the law, and willingly traded the nation's soul as collateral for a financial loan?
That is the true, lingering horror of Vienna Shadows. The monsters aren't always hiding in the dark alleys or the flooded basements. Sometimes they are standing proudly at the podium in the middle of the day.
Making sure they aren't the ones who bleed when the inkwells start flying. That's all for today's deep dive. We'll see you next time.
This concludes today's episode. Don't forget to rate and subscribe. Until next time, Vienna Shadows, signing off.